howdy doodies, iTunes podcast listeners and YouTube perusers. You are tuned in to Frivolous Gravitas. I'm your host, Christopher Driver, and with me, as always, the diligent and magnanimous Mr. Jordan Roy. Today, we're going to delve into our awareness and control systems of bias. Jordan's going to start us off with some definitions first, namely that of implicit bias, and show us whether or not it even is a problem needing to be solved, and then take stock of some considerations in analyzing and testing for that bias in general. So sit back, grab a snack, and hope you enjoy. Jordan, take us away.
Now we will go on the roller coaster of fun. Okay, so fun is illegal. But yeah, so one of the things we talked last week a lot about bias. So this is kind of like a second of two parts. But like Kris says, we're going to start with a couple definitions, I guess. And one of the things is specifically implicit bias. So last week we talked about bias in general, I guess, right? Fueling bias and how your bias can eat you alive.
Fueling bias.
Yeah. So this week I want to talk about a lot more of the technical aspects of bias, as Kris mentioned already. And so I think a good place to start with that would be to ask the question, well, okay, not ask the question, I'll just say, what implicit bias is a, like I said, a unconscious or automatic judgment that affects our actions. So something that happens just behind the scenes. If you're a Freudian, it's, the subconscious or the unconscious, just one of the automatic processes that we have. So a lot of times this comes up in the, if you might have seen this at work where they force you to take a test, which we're going to talk about a lot today, the implicit bias test. Yeah, the implicit aptitude test. And I should know this. But
we'll use acronyms, the IAT.
The IAT. So the IAT, they force companies will, go to a company that's probably formed in the last 3 years and say, oh, we want to get this accreditation that we are a progressive company that, actually cares about current social issues, hello, fellow children, that kind of thing. And they bring in an expert, which I use in heavy air quotes, which administers a test and forces and lets everyone see their biases. So in thought, this is a good idea. It makes sense on the surface because, you're showing everybody to be more inclusive and understanding, blah, blah, blah. But if everyone's working with each other, chances are that they don't care the color of the sex or the anything of the person they're working with. In fact, they probably know, and they talk about it at lunch being like, oh, well, you've got ADD, so you're an idiot. Ha! And then, the person with ADD laughs because they know that they're not actually making fun of them. They're aware of the differences between them, but they don't care because what's important is, well, the job, making money, getting the product out, doing a good job, whatever it is that your comedy troupe or brickmaker does. And so it's an exercise in enforcing or making unconscious self more of a self-aware. So having more self-aware employees, you can do this and you can have a more open and diverse and inclusive environment where people don't hurt each other. Now, I don't know what world they're living in, but it's one where they believe that everyone is attacking each other because in reality, if a bad company will exacerbate the worst in anything, a good company, people won't care. One of the things that we talk about, at least in my household, is that if you're incompetent, whatever thing you have that differentiates you will be picked on. It's not the fact that you are that, it's the fact that you are incompetent. So, well, that's something we'll get to a bit later, maybe. So the test measures what we would call implicit bias, which revolves in implicit cognition, which I talked about last week to some extent, very briefly. So implicit cognition is that process itself, the processes, the cognitive sets that you have in your mental set, in using psychological terms, to make the decisions. And the bias are those opinions that your brain has hard coded into its functioning. Now the question is that I'm leading up to is, does implicit bias actually exist? Now, from what I've talked about, I don't like the idea of implicit bias tests. I don't like where it's coming from. I don't like the purpose. I don't like why they're administering it. I don't like the end goal. I don't like anything about it. So, but it's still worthwhile to ask whether or not implicit bias itself, the thing that they're testing for, is something that actually exists. So, on one hand, if we say there isn't, well, okay, if there isn't implicit bias, then how do we make judgments? Okay, I don't really have much of an argument for this. Maybe if you've got one.
Yeah, actually.
Okay, go ahead, because I've got good arguments.
Well, I guess it's more of a question than or a comment to it. But like, what makes us feel, if we have these unconscious biases that are negatively impacting society, what makes us feel that we're competent enough to even have an authority figure analyze and assess and test these types of biases?
Right. If everyone has implicit bias, then how can we have someone test for implicit bias without being implicitly biased?
By definition, if it exists by definition, then there shouldn't be an authority on it, because everybody should be susceptible to it.
Right.
So on premise alone, it's just confusing to me.
Well, the answer to that I've heard is that some biases are healthy. Like, you perform a paradox on their brains, and then they'll just they'll go from the Mott into the Bailey. So the Mott and Bailey form of argumentation is where you put out something like, kill all white people, and it's like, well, we don't act, and someone say, well, you don't actually mean kill, like you can't kill people, like killing people is bad, and it's like, then they retreat to the Bailey, which is their sub. Well, what we're actually meaning is that we want to destroy a system of patriarchal and racial hegemony. Okay, so you're not actually saying kill all white people, but when you say kill all white people, you actually probably do mean kill all white people, because when you're saying something ironically, the thing that you have to realize is that you're still saying it. So this is why you have to be careful with irony, and why, when it's done right, it's sometimes hilarious. So
always hilarious. I love irony.
Irony done well is, just why, a comedian who could do it well is so great. So there isn't social bias, and I think I can't really defend it, because to me, there actually is social bias. I wrote here in my notes, I just wrote, duh. Thanks, Jordan. That was great note taking. 100%.
Well, let's put it another way then. If we didn't have social bias, what would the world look like? If we had no biases whatsoever, every time we did something simple like tying our shoelaces or going outside or before we speak, we wouldn't be able to have a flowing conversation. No. If you got to check yourself at every single step and syllable.
Everything, right? It would be like interacting with a computer.
Yeah, it would be exactly like that. If you ever listen to a computer play music, it's hard to say exactly what sounds off about it, but there's no flow to it. There's no feeling or emotion in a computer playing music. It's just perfectly timed intervals of all the sine waves that are combined.
Or, well, you discriminate, and you have a bias towards certain music that you like, right? So you have 50 songs, and then you make them flow. You put them in an order that'd be like, okay, this one and then this one. So you're using your implicit bias in order to discriminate. Now, discriminate is something that we do, and discrimination is not a bad thing, because, well, you need to discriminate between the things that you want to do and the things that you don't, the things that are
especially when it comes to punishment, right? Imagine if we didn't discriminate between criminals. We just locked everybody up.
Well, this is kind of what's happening here with the Inquisition. So without implicit bias, you're essentially taking that, your perfectly curated flow of songs and music, and just pressing shuffle. No, everything gets equal opportunity to be at any point in the thing, and it's run by a thing. So we need discrimination as humans. Now, the problem with it is that when we act as groups, the factor on which we're evaluating implicit bias isn't always the same. Now, when you're using an implicit bias test, or the IAT is specifically measuring for certain types of bias, very specific and actually very inconsequential. Well, not inconsequential, but they're like one of 1,000 types of biases that we have. We have biases of everything. I've got a bias for a hockey team. Guess which one it is. If you go back in our thing, you can probably see the jersey in the background.
Go Penguins!
What?
Just kidding.
I'm biased towards the Jets. Not so much biased that I'll hate the other team for beating them. They suck this year. It's been 2 games and they're terrible. I'm biased, so I want them to do better. And I want to see them do better. There's no real point to me enjoying the Jets. None of the players are from Winnipeg. I lived in Winnipeg. That's about the only factor involved. Historically, I used to cheer for them when I was a kid, so who knows? And I like hockey I have a bias for hockey over any other thing. Hobbyists. I like shooting guns. I'm going to have a bias towards that activity. So, you want to go to the range, or do you want to go frolic around the maypole? Well, maypoles are fun, but I think I'm going to have to choose the range. Or do you want to go watch a NASCAR show? It's like, no, I do not want to watch NASCAR. No, I do not. But if you're from the southern states and your father was a mechanic, maybe you probably would love NASCAR. Like, there's no wrong. That's not a wrong thing. We can make fun of you for it, and it's not bad to make fun of you for liking NASCAR. It's expected that you make fun of us for liking hockey.
And the Jets especially.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They're just so bad this year.
Yeah, they give us reason for shame.
I had hope because they shuffled the thing. T-shirt color. I like wearing a red shirt. I think I look good in a red shirt. I wear red shirts on Canada Day too, because, it's Canada Day. Like wear a red shirt with a white shirt in the middle to, make it look like the Canada flag. But I don't. This is another form of implicit bias that we have. I like the color green. So if I have a choice between shirt colors, I'm going to choose the green one because I like the color green. Now, here's one. Sex. Well, we're kind of implicitly biased towards, the yes side of sex, right?
Yeah, generally.
So that's kind of an implicit physical bias. If you say, would you like to live your entire life without sex? Or not? Well, there's going to have to be a good reason. Maybe I'm implicitly biased towards Jesus and I don't want to have, go and have sex. That's... But
even in that case, there's such a tiny, tiny, minute population of people who are Christians who actually endorse celibacy for themselves.
And it's so like the implicit bias that our bodies and minds, which are the same thing, deal with it. That's kind of Harari's kind of opened me that. It's like there's no difference. And I think Peterson talked about that a bit too, but
we'll have to have a philosophy episode on dualism, the mind-body problem.
Mind-body. It makes more sense to just be like, you are everything that your body is. But your body has an implicit bias towards yes, please, when it comes to sex. Or else the species wouldn't have propagated, which is why when Christians maintain celibacy, it's seen as a heroic act, because to some extent, to maintain celibacy in the face of temptation for an entire life, that's willpower of, worthy of admiration. Like, that guy had so much discipline under so much temptation, and he didn't touch any boys or anything. He didn't have a secret mistress. He didn't, go on the internet at night and look at, say, oh yes, I have taken no temptation. He didn't do anything. That's heroic because of the implicit bias.
But even some people that are asexual, like there's still going to be the temptation with them to please another person who is sexual, who does want to have sex, right? So Even when a person doesn't personally have a bias towards it, they'll have a social bias towards it.
Yeah, and I can't speak to eunuchs either, because honestly, I have no idea how that would change things. But the thing of it is that it does exist. And when we boil a implicit bias test, so where is your implicit bias? So now some people have, this is not going to be controversial, I promise. Some people have an implicit bias towards liking people of the same sex. We call them gay or lesbian, or bi if they have an implicit bias to everything. And this is an implicit bias. When I was growing up and I was coming of age, I noticed I had an implicit bias to certain types of women, and not others. And, even among attractive women and girls, I was like 12. I liked certain types, the tomboyish types and stuff like that. I don't know why, but I had an implicit bias towards it, whether it was psychological or chemical. I don't know. That's just the way I was brought up. So it made sense to me for someone to, it's just like, well, I like this. So it made sense to me for someone to have an implicit bias towards someone of, an opposite or the same sex or the opposite sex or just anything really. So
I guess we could call it the sex bias.
Sex bias. Well, that's
to Randy it up a bit.
Yeah. We're going to talk about sex today. All right, let's move on from sex. I also wrote chess club. The people in chess club are going to have an implicit bias towards the other people in chess club. This is in-group behavior. We have an implicit bias towards the people of our same group. And so, should we test for this? No, that's stupid. Why would we test for it? Everyone in the chess club is going to have an implicit bias towards everyone everyone else in the chess club. We don't need to test for that. It's obvious. So having an implicit bias test, saying, where you like have a picture of someone in the chess club come up, and you press one button, and you have someone not in the chess club come up and you press another button. Like, we don't need to have some kind of test for that. So the variable that you're testing, now the variable we're testing here is race. And the thing that it comes from is, you have, it's testing for the strength of, so the test itself, the implicit aptitude or the implicit association test is something that was designed in the early 2000s. Based on some scholarship in the 90s that said, like, what if we could find out where people's biases were that they don't know? So you might actually what it's testing for is there's an assumption that people don't know they're racist. People don't know they're sexist. They automatically assume that, dark bad, light good. Now, to me, a lot of that is like, yes, humans have always associated white with purity because a white sheet is clean. And cleanliness in the ancient world was something that was, dirty equals death. And something that's dirty is usually gray or brown or something. This doesn't have anything to do with skin color. Yes, some people might have associated it, but those people were idiots. The early, scientific sociologists were definitely, by today's standards, what we would call incorrect.
And for context, this is also a time when they believed in witches and exorcism. They believed in phrenology, the science that the shape of your skull dictates how smart or intelligent or what human characteristics you have. Like, we were still figuring out material reality back then. Mm-hmm. So it's not weird for people to associate good and bad with light and dark, just in terms of like cleanliness being next to godliness, like you said, because clean things don't get as much disease and die soon. So it's not about these people are all evil because of their skin color. It's more like the reverse, where everything that's white and black, and then they just relate to skin color afterwards. So it's like an afterthought.
Which is a metaphorical association in the first place, because I'm not white. I'm
Pink.
This pink. And then black people aren't black. They're
Brown.
Like the darkest black people are like chestnut.
Yeah, and Asian people aren't yellow. Like
No.
Aboriginal people aren't red. Like
No.
the oversimplification is what people are just clinging to, and then they're obsessing over those details as if that's the be-all end-all of racism is color.
Right.
To me, it's more to do with groups of people than it does about skin color.
Well, one thing I kind of blew my mind when I was in like third year university is someone said that like there's more diversity within groups than between groups, like which blows racism out of the water. Like racism's always already ridiculous. I think we talked about that in our levity episode where, racist jokes are funny because racism is inherently stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but the funny thing is the testing is almost just as stupid. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of you a little bit, but like in the example of
yeah,
in the example of the discrimination of music, right? If I were to say that I have my own taste in music and that's my own preference, and then if I were to dictate those preferences across all human beings and saying everybody who doesn't like my music likes a lesser form of music, that's
which
not
people do. Yeah, but go on.
Yeah, I don't know how they square that peg with diversity and inclusion. You say you want everybody to be different, and everybody needs to be inclusive, and then we deny people's individualities.
Well, it's part of the new religion that's besetting our world, that there's racism, which is against black people or non-white people or BIPOC or whatever. And then there's the other side of it, which is WASPs, white people like me. So I'm inherently racist and prejudiced and biased because I have an ingrained, what do they call it? Historical prejudice towards certain groups of people, which is ridiculous. Because
isn't that the same as like original sin, like being sinful from birth and having inherited the sins of your parents? Like we know that's absurd because I didn't do anything that my parents did.
Now, okay, original sin is something I think is actually fascinating, but it is you hit on a point that's that I didn't actually write down that I should have, because I have original sin, and so this test is to test for your amount of original sin, and then just like in the church, you have to do penance for being white. So that means groveling before random black people, asking for forgiveness for just being, saying things, putting your merit away, that kind of things. Now, original sin isn't actually something I think is the simplistic definition of original sin. Now, original sin itself actually kind of makes sense because we're all kind of born broken. And that's the sin. It's not the sin as in like we're tainted by Lucifer. We're originally created, whether by God or just a fluke of nature, which might literally just be the same thing, and to screw up by nature of the way we're built. Like we can't know if whatever we do is going to be the right or the wrong thing. We're going to sin no matter how hard we try. Thus, sin. Not we sin because we're sinful. No, we sin because we're human. That's original sin to me. If you are Christian or Protestant or Catholic or whatever you are in the comments, please enlighten me and we'll have a debate on original sin if you want to defend a position.
Well, the original sin was supposedly Adam and Eve's being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and then we all inherited that type of sin, the betrayal of God and the not listening to his word, and so the punishment is all our hardships through life.
Yeah,
because we turned our backs on God. But we didn't.
We didn't. No, we didn't. Like sins of the father. Like,
right. So when you're born, God's saying like you're an asshole because you sinned, and the baby's like, "What the fuck? I just got here."
Right. So it's like I don't have to pay for the sins of my grandfather. Now my great grandfather was a businessman from, I don't know, I was just looking at some of the records. He came from a town called Przemyśl, which is by Lviv, in Galicia, which is now part of Poland. And I don't think he had anything to do with the American slave trade. So, well, okay, but everyone in the Western world is complicit in this. Well, I'm Canadian. I wasn't really born. And so this contradictory philosophy, which assumes that once, that everyone when they're born is a tabula rasa, but at the same time, certain people have either historical trauma, which is, genetic trauma via epigenetics, which is something I've heard people say. Some people in positions of authority in even my life say like, oh, well, they have genetic trauma from what happened in the past. No, that's not how that works. It's much more like you need to do your research.
Some of it is a genetic trauma, though. Like if right. During the potato famine or whatever,
that's where it comes from.
Yeah,
but it's pretty much it goes away. Like it's completely physical and it goes away within 2 generations.
But the thing is, like anxiety disorders or mental problems, or some people even say like homosexuality and stuff is part of that, which is obviously probably wrong, but not guaranteed to be wrong. But the thing about it is they're claiming to know things that they don't actually know. So there might be an inference towards something that's worth studying, but that doesn't mean that it exists. It just means that it's worth looking into. And without the data and science to look into it, people claiming one way or the other, whether it does exist or it doesn't exist, are both wrong, because neither of them could possibly know, because we haven't figured out mental illness yet. So
we're currently in the stage where we're calling every abnormality mental illness without actually defining what the baseline is, because if you define the baseline, if you define what's normal, then well, who wants to be that guy who defines the normal person where everyone else in the world just be like, that's not me.
And could you imagine being that guy? He'd feel so boring. Like, oh, I'm the most normal person on earth.
Hi, I'm Brandon. It's just kind of a dark beige.
But I think you touched on something there with the trauma. Because until we figure out what trauma is, telling people that we know what trauma is just flat out wrong. Well, I think that's part of the problem is like they're claiming to know that a test A proves that somebody has this type of bias that has caused this type of trauma. Like they don't know the bias, they don't know the trauma, and they don't know the conditions.
Well, and like we both have gone through certain degrees of trauma, and I bet you all of our listeners have too. Don't put your trauma in the comments. It's personal. So
trigger warning.
Trigger warning. I hate trigger warnings. That'll be in my safety episode.
My alarm clock is a trigger warning. Every time I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, there's a real life around me now. I'm not dreaming.
So, but like what was I talking about? Oh yeah. Okay. So, but like we all have trauma. We all have this thing. And to say that some person that makes double what I do, running a bias test, has more trauma than me and therefore can judge my inherent bias with a test that measures my not only measures my victim status or something like that, but okay, so let's actually talk about how this test works. So what happens is it comes off of this old test where they showed like kids, like you've seen these tests online where they say, look, this is how we're treating our kids. And they show kids like brown dolls and kids like white dolls. And which one do you like better? And the kid goes, I like this one better, and randomly or something.
Chubby Barbies.
Yeah, I like chubby Barbies, and they like the skinny one better. I wonder why, because that one's healthy. So,
he's joking, people.
So and so it looks good, and it seems scientific because you're doing a test. But what you need in a test is not just one test; you need multiple tests. But so a group of guys at Harvard built a test in the 2010s, early 20-aughts, anyway, around 2010. I think it came out in 2012 or 20 around then. I don't have the number on here. It's not on the screen. 10 to 15 years ago. So they built this test and to measure this. And what you do, and it kind of makes sense, is that it flashes a picture of someone up and you have 2 keys and you're supposed to react within the first milliseconds. So you react without thinking. So your unconscious is the one at work. So you're automatically putting your unconscious to be the one at work. And you press two keys and you say, okay, one key is good, one key is bad. And they train you a bit like a lie detector test, a polygraph, where like, do you live at home? And you're like, yes. Do you eat food for breakfast? Yes. Have you ever ridden a dinosaur? No. Okay. So now we have a baseline. So now you're getting into it. Good. Good things are good. Bad things are bad. Yeah. Pain, good. No. Wrong. Pain, bad. So we can do this. These certain things are objectively good and certain things are objectively bad. So eating a poisoned steak, bad. Having a wonderful day on your birthday, good. So
there are certain things we can all agree on, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, and then there's those like contrarians who are like, actually, I like cloudy days, and it's just like, oh, grow up. Like,
I eat poison for breakfast.
It's like, yeah. Well, we've all done that. I remember being like 6 and doing that. It's like, I want to be different, so I'll just be contrarian. It's just sad when adults do that. So what ends up doing is they show you a picture of like different types of people, and you'll be like, good, bad, and you just won't think about it, and it'll try and trick you a bit. And it lasts for a number, and then at the end it says, well, you are this much racist. So we've measured racism in a person. So this is a way of literally measuring the amount of racism in a person. Sounds cool. That'd be neat. We could just be like, oh, you are 50% racist, or you're like 0% racist. But one of the problems is that the test itself it gives you different answers every time you take it, and it doesn't really work. But we have to get into why it doesn't work. So there's a couple things. These are not explicit biases. So you have now there are explicit racists, people who explicitly don't like people of other things. In fact, while studying this, I found explicit racism, which is actually kind of rare in at least my life. And I found like a whites dating site where they were like, keep the white race going, do all that stuff. And that was really interesting. I brought my wife down. I was like, man, get down here. Look at this. There's actual racism.
Look, like, I see it.
Look, I found some. Like, every once in a while you'll meet some guy that you can just dismiss as being drunk or being an idiot or being an asshole. Because when you're like, we like to say, well, racism is bad. Well, of course it's bad. But when you take it down to boil it down to what it actually is, it's just somebody being an asshole. So, like, and they have a complicated series of justifications for being an asshole. And some of them are pseudoscientific, and some people make them political, like that dating website, keep the white race pure and all that stupid stuff. So
mostly it's like misrepresented data. And that's sort of what irks me so much. It's not even that they're misusing the data. It's not even the racism, the outcome. It's the misuse of the data that bothers me, because I find that's more harmful than having a stupid opinion of a skin color.
Oh, yeah.
You can just brush off some idiot, but you can't brush off an idiot who's promoting science, with air quotes.
And so, but this is the same thing that's happening on the other side with these tests, because the people administering the tests aren't actually misusing the data. But if you're explicitly racist and you take the test, what happens if it comes up and says you're not racist? Well, actually, that's weird.
Imagine they get all mad. I am. Yeah. I'm so racist.
Totally racist. Puts on his hood, doubles down, goes home to his beautiful black wife and children.
That'd be so funny. Closet radical.
Yeah. It's just...
I mean, funny, not funny, obviously, because
like, just imagine a KKK guy comes home and he's got like a black wife and mulatto kids, and he loves them very much. And are you going to the KKK meeting today? No, I've got a shuffleboard tournament.
I promise I'll go tomorrow. Don't worry.
She likes him because he's dangerous.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway.
I wouldn't put it past our species. We're so dumb we would totally do stuff like that.
Oh, there was like...
Just let it get out of control.
Yeah. And
But I think the issue I take with these tests, if you don't mind, I sort of...
No, go ahead.
We've had these before, like the Myers-Briggs test for personality types, like INFJ, ENFJ, and AMPD.
Which always came across to me as like astrology, because it felt like astrology. Oh, I'm this.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is, too. Like, are you a Virgo, are you a Leo, or whatever?
Yeah.
And then there's like IQ tests. Like, they use IQ tests to determine whether somebody's mentally retarded. In other words, to identify a delay, not to show how smart people are. And they're taking the test the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
And it seems to me they're doing this with the implicit bias test, if maybe I'm wrong.
Well, this is what you want to do. You want to categorize people and seeing, like, you want to find intelligence, you want to find genius, and you want to find mental deficiency. And you want to find, and so that when you can do it, you can administer the remedy, which is putting them, taking them out of their position of authority. No, we got to take you. It turns out you have a low IQ, so we got to get you out of the Reichstag. But the
test is defining the radicalism, the extremes.
Right.
That's to me is what's weird. Is like they're taking the test that identifies an extreme and they're using it to the opposite extreme.
Well,
to see how little racist you are, or to see how smart you are.
For IQ, you have a bunch of different tests, and they're kind of problematic. But like, if you generally score good on a bunch of IQ tests, probably you're going to be pretty intelligent. You're not going to, like, an idiot isn't really going to be able to do well on a bunch of IQ tests. They might get lucky on one if it's like all multiple choice and stuff like that. But it's going to be hard for someone who's not bright to do well on one of those. And they're going to accidentally find themselves in Mensa or something. For those who don't know, Mensa is like a group of intelligent people who like to pat themselves on the back for being intelligent.
That's literally all it is.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, we should make a group of people who score well on this retard test.
We can get together and do smart people stuff. It's, and so what the problem is that with the implicit bias test is it's more like an inquisition. It's a test to find, now in the Middle Ages, now we brought up original sin, but in the Middle Ages, they're looking for the devil. Now the devil now is racism, because this philosophy is a religion, essentially.
Because we're enlightened, man.
Yeah, we're enlightened. We're scientific now. It's like, yeah, well, we're still people. But the Inquisition would go around. Now, I don't think I need to explain the Inquisition too much, but they would go around searching for people that were seduced by the devil, or in Congress with the devil, which is naughty, and or in league, or possessed. And so they need to go in and burn them and whatnot. And they're looking for something that can't actually be proven. And they're looking for something that is inherent to them. Oh, they're actually a witch. Well, are they actually a witch? The person in question doesn't actually know whether or not they're a witch. So it's up to the priesthood. It's up to the inquisitional priesthood to come along, lay down what the religion is the religion according to social justice. Those who are of the dark skin, yea, shall they inherit the kingdom of God. Those who are of the light skin maintain the taint of sin, and we must root that sin out and expunge it from the world to maintain this, glorious communist utopia or something. I don't know. And so what we got to do is find it. And it's everywhere. It's nefarious. It's lurking in the shadows, just like the devil. And so we administer a test. Now, to give the devil his due, to keep with the metaphor, 2 of the 3 people that came up with the test have disavowed this test. They came out and said this test is stupid. It doesn't actually work. I don't know what the other guy's talking about. But they came out and said this is not a good way of finding bias. And to their credit, they weren't looking for racism when they were finding the test. They were literally looking at measuring bias itself. And so they weren't using this as a tool to as an inquisitional tool. They were psychologists trying to find a way to measure psychology. And two of them said, well, we were wrong. But it got picked up by the woke.
Well, I think
crowd.
one of the big reasons it gained steam is because the test came out in 1995, and in 1998 it was one of the biggest things on the internet. So it was sort of like before internet tests were a thing.
Yeah.
It was the first one.
And it kind of picked up more steam in like 2012 when it became this thing that you could buy for your what do you call it? For your company. And so it's a two-part thing. You're selling a two-part product in your inquisitional package. You are looking for this implicit cognition. It sounds all scientific. Now I'm using a lot of scientific and psychological words here, but in the administration of it, it's anything but, because you administer the bias tests, and then you bring in a bunch of people to do anti-bias training. Look at this bias all you guys have, and the people who do their job for a living, work, they don't spend time on the internet thinking about this stuff, or they haven't been to university in years, so they're not up on the lunacy that's happening. And so they are now administered to anti-bias training. And my wife had to go through this in university. They send to anti-bias training every 3 weeks or something, and which has no actual evidence that it reduces bias in any way, because like I said before, bias is inherent to your biology, your psychology. Everything about you has a bias. You're not going to get rid of it, because you're not just going to be able to randomize your interactions with everybody. And so they do stuff like finding, they do that, like everyone who's got this, walk a step forward. Everyone who's been black, walk a step back. And now look at how much more privilege you have than all the other people. And everyone looks around and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I was hurting these people simply by existing. No, they're your coworkers. Like, you can't be pitting people against each other like this. And that's all it does. It puts a schema around the relations of the people and pits them against each other along lines of race or sexuality, which is stupid, because they're already coming together in the name of doing a good job at work, in the name of having to work together every day. Everyone's already going to complain about each other, everyone that they work with already. That doesn't mean they're biased. It just means that they spend too much time with people.
So if I may then, my question is, I don't really know how they came to decide that this was actually a productive method. Like, I don't really get how somebody decides and thinks that they are even capable of walking into a room and telling other people, like, to polarize themselves with other people, and then say that they're helping socialize everybody. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like a kid walking into a schoolyard saying no bullies and then punches people. Like, they're doing the thing that they're telling everybody else to stop doing. Stop judging people by their skin color.
Right.
Here's an expert skin color judge to tell you that you're doing it.
Well, that's why I call it a priesthood, because, the priests are saying, don't do this, even though we're all sinful. The priest is literally a person with sin. But that's kind of part of being human, is, I guess, having to deal with the fact that you're inherently not perfect, and we're all like, there's no perfection guide that we can lead to, which is kind of why God is almost important in a way, but that's another episode entirely. We have this ideal of, the mostest of all the toastists.
But just practically speaking, do you have any idea why? Maybe you don't know either, but why are they saying that there's this expert skin color specialist telling you, all of your employees, that, because of your skin color, you're this, and because of your skin color, you're this? Like, the whole approach to it is so ass backwards. It's like nobody notices or recognizes it. To have one person as an authority on unconscious bias, for them to understand unconscious bias, they would also have to be human and have unconscious bias. So it's one thing to train people and show them how to pick it out in themselves. But the approach that they're doing with, like, McCarthyism, where they go around accusing people, that is the opposite of helpful.
We need to find all the communists. well, let's look at everyone who's been to a communist meeting. Well, under McCarthy, I'd be kicked out of my government job if I was in that era and working in the government, because
you'd be in jail.
Yeah, see my I Left episode, because I had been a communist.
And see my socialism episode.
Yeah, well, and like I definitely am not now. But the thing is that I base there's an entire philosophy of victimization and making right the wrongs of history, and it sounds good. I'd say there's nothing actually based in reality or logic, but it's a rejection of, there's an inherent rejection of truth and reason going along with it. It's because you can say, well, this doesn't make sense. Who are you to throw the first stone? The old adage, let ye who was without sin throw the first stone. That's going to probably become the quote, isn't it? And so, but they're saying, well, no, because I have I have an inherent institutional victimization. I'm able to speak on this. And so you align with not reason, but with emotion. And what it sounds good can be actually true, because subjectivity is what's more indicative of reality than anything else, because the personal subjectivity matters more than anything else. So if a Black person says they're a victim, well, then they're a victim, that whole believe all women thing. And so what happens is if you speak out against the church, you are inherently a heretic. You're inherently someone who, you become like instantly like, I don't think this is right. And then, apostasy. And then everyone becomes, look at the heretic, look at the apostate, look at them. Everyone see, this is the face of the devil. This is the face of, the racist, the horrible person. And it's just Joe.
Well, I think that right there causes more racism, more than anything. I think that when you point a finger and guilt and shame somebody publicly for their skin color, they're going to be more likely to have a distasteful affect towards other skin colors.
Right.
Look at what you've caused all this pain and shame on me just for your skin being Black. Like,
you can get away with anything. Like, one of the things that hurt me the most. Now I've been a victim of racism. Last Canada Day was horrible. Some Indigenous fellow, he's not Indigenous, he's a jerk. He has nothing to do with him being Indigenous. He, called me something I'm not going to repeat, an Indigenous swear, on Canada Day, blew smoke in my face, and, was asking for a fight. And I'm just like I was in Jasper, I was having fun with my wife on Canada Day, enjoying what is Canada Day, which is why I had that Canada Day episode, because I was just incensed. The other thing that happened on Canada Day was in Winnipeg, they tore down the statue of the Queen, and they're all crying, being like, oh, we're finally fighting back against the colonial power. It's like, that colonial power has been dead.
Yeah, really. What's the Queen done in Canada other than visit and pay us?
Yeah. And so, well, she's a symbol. Well, no, she's not a symbol. She's a symbol of an ancient thing that doesn't actually exist anymore.
She's literally a relic.
And so, and I felt that this wasn't an attack, and we weren't allowed to, like, all the news, the police were just standing there, letting it happen, letting vandalism happen. And we weren't allowed to do anything about it. It was just this wanton destruction. And because it's in the name of, tit for tat, we were victimized, therefore we get to victimize, which is not part of the Western code of justice. That's
also not how we fix problems. No,
which is why we don't have that in our justice system. Well, he punched you in the face, and the judge says you get to punch him in the face, which isn't fair, because if I punch someone who's just 300 pounds of muscle in the face, tit for tat, he gets to punch me in the face. That's not going to be a fair punishment. And then the circle of violence. See our forgiveness episode.
Right, and that circle of violence is like a firefighter rushing to a fire with fire.
Right.
Like not putting out with the water, but using fire to try and put out more fire.
Right.
That's what it is.
Seeing this, and I know that they're like native people. I know they're indigenous people, and I can't hold it against the indigenous people for doing this. I can hold it against the individuals for doing that. But someone who's not as enlightened, I can definitely understand being, damn those native people for doing that. They accuse the group, which is causing, like you just said, exactly the response opposite to what they want. Now, maybe not opposite. If you are a canny revolutionary, you would form an opposition where there isn't one. And I do not want to get into that because that can get very conspiratorial real fast. And I don't know if that's what's happening. I'm sure there's a lot of people saying we need to create our enemy, create the right so that we can fight it. But I don't think that's exactly what's happened. You get the Black Bloc people and the Antifa people going around looking for victimization. I've seen this at multiple protests that I've been at, observing at, and they would just yell at the cops and get them to attack them to create this victimhood. Look at what's happened to me, and they create an other of themselves. The problem is that they also don't have individuality. They're seeing themselves as a group. The whole philosophy doesn't see, and this is, I think, the other block in the building of this, and that this test represents, is that when you don't see people as individuals, you can see them as groups, and then you can say stuff like, "White people are racist." Well, why? It's inherent to who they are. It's in your genetics. I've heard that a couple times, and so, well, it's not how genetics works. But if you say, okay, people don't work as individuals. Individuals are constructs of their group and their surroundings and their histories. And so you have people actually align with their identity groups. And when you do this, what happens is the individual gets lost. The individual is something selfish. The individual is something that is apostasy. And so you can ignore the individual. Well, you're just doing this because that's what your group does. That's the type. That's just your philosophy. You can just ignore that. And so when there's no groups, you can show that certain groups have certain attributes by applying a bias association test, a flawed test, to show what you want to show, and then perform the inquisition and the exorcism, which is the anti-bias training upon these people. And so the thing about it is that this is extremely racist because you're essentially putting certain groups over others. Now, in Canada, we already have certain groups delineated from others. See Quebec, see language laws, see this, which are, I guess, this. But when you say something like white people are racist, that's racist. When you have a conception that some races are entitled to different things than others, that's racist. That's also other thingist because, you can make any group you want. And that's the problem with grouping people together in anything other than individuals, is that, like I said, there's more diversity within groups than between groups. Like if you've had a family reunion, you'll see this. Everybody's family got reunion, that
uncle, right?
Yeah, every family reunion. You go to a family reunion of any family, of any race, and it'll kind of have that same feeling. But you'll all see the panoply of humanity in every family reunion. Like there's the quiet kid, there's that one uncle, there's that one aunt or grandma that just kind of holds everything together through her baking.
Oh yeah, food was always big with my crazy family.
The food may change. But
hi, crazy family.
Hi, I'm Kris's friend.
We're all one of you.
But there's still humanity there, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Is like we are all humanity together, and You can't convince me otherwise. We're all individually human. We're all human as a group. And
can I make a comment just on the group thing there?
Yeah.
I find it really strange. Again, sort of hard. I don't mean to harp on the approach thing, but I really think that's critical to this whole test. It's an approach to bias fixing or correction, right?
Yeah.
So we say if I see a black person steal, we don't want the actions of an entire group being placed on the actions of an individual, like you were saying with the indigenous person who mouthed off to you and was really disrespectful. We don't want to judge the group based on an individual. But on the flip side, the fix to this seems to be that they want the group to take responsibility and get punished for the actions of a few individuals from that group who are racist. Because it really is a tiny minority of even racist people who are aggressively racist. Most people don't want to harm other people. It makes them uncomfortable and it hurts them too. No. So like even racist people don't try to hurt people.
Well, this is... No, to fortify your point, this is shown in a lot of military training, specifically the book On Killing by.
That's astute.
It's an amazing book. Go read it. It's hard to read, but let me just find the author quickly.
No, I'll look it in the description. Just let me know after.
So the book On Killing essentially states that it's actually hard to get people to kill. 95% of people that enter combat won't actually shoot to kill. Won't actually be inclined to kill unless you like corner them or indoctrinate them, see China, or get or train them to snap attack. So what this is bad guy, and so you get them to attack without thinking. Aim for the center of mass. Bad guy, aim, shoot, center of mass. And so... Which is
effective. Like it's
effective.
If you need people to go out there and kill other people so that you don't die, like that's useful. To desensitize people. I want to make sure that's clear on the record.
Yeah, well, it's somewhat desensitizing, but it's not even getting them to think about it. It's getting them to, well, we're having a war, and we need to destroy this Panzer Grenadier Division. How do we do that? Well, if everyone's shooting over their heads, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah.
You need at least 50% of the people to be actively trying to kill the other team. And so because, 25% are going to hit combat and just be like, their body, everything about them is just going to be like, nope. And just, it happens. You never, as far as we can tell, you can't know if you are going to be able to actually exist in combat until you've actually gotten there. Someone very close to me in my life found out a couple of years ago that they were actually able to function in combat, which was very actually scary for them because they realized that they were the type of person that wouldn't need to go through much training to aim for the center mass. And this person I'm talking about is a very gentle, caring person, but they have the mental state and the capability to work in combat. I don't even know if I could, if it happened, if the apocalypse happened and I had to actually use my firearms to defend myself or my neighborhood or something, but then like, who knows? I could fall apart and be like, my body and my psychology could be like, nope. But with training, you can get people to not think about it. The enemy division.
Or repeated exposure too.
Repeated exposure helps. But one thing they found out in World War II was that even the hardest of soldiers only are useful on the front lines for about 90 to 120 days. You can see this in the book Citizen Soldiers by Stephen Ambrose, who is a bit of a boaster, but he's got good books. He's the guy
I think Band of Brothers mentioned it too. That was part of the plot line.
That's the same author.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is, people generally are disinclined to want to hurt each other, but you give them a good reason and you can make the smallest people act in the most horrifying ways. See Ordinary Men, the people who were just random people who were recruited to become Jew hunters in Poland during World War II. And so with an ideology, and this goes back, I'm citing a lot of stuff, with citing our activism episode, you, with an ideology, you can, where is that allows you to ends justify the means something, you can justify some pretty gosh darn terrible things. These people are evil. Therefore, I don't feel bad about killing them. These people are apostates. These people are tools of the devil. They're heathens. They're heretics. There's all these things. They're racists. There's this and that. They're, I don't know. I've heard some people be like, well, they're Republicans. It's just like, it's like,
Yeah.
and it's just like, no, Republicans are just people that have different economic perspectives than you. Yeah, and they're from the South, and they have that history, and some of them, a lot of the noisier ones are annoyingly noisy, but most of them are just people like you living in a different spot who have different economic opinions. Deal with it. So, and the thing is that you can learn to move about it. If you have an economic opinion or you have some kind of opinion, it's been shown that you can move out of that. You can have an implicit bias against Black people. But then there's that guy going around in the States having conversations with KKK members. And after one or like a night of beers with them, he convinces them to give up their ways. And he's got a closet full of KKK robes that he's proud to just have in his closet because these are the robes that represent people who have given up and renounced racism and that kind of institutional racism that they're actually hating. People can become better. They can come back to rationality. And
that sort of train of events is also very common. It's common enough to be in movies. Like, you know, Crash is a wicked movie for that.
Oh, yeah.
Further
Redemption arc.
Yeah. But further back was American History X. That was like the entire plot line to the movie was that.
Yeah. And he goes to jail, sees how stupid it is, comes back, goes, no, that's dumb.
Yeah, and how common is that too? Like even on the flip side, you got Black guys that wind up in jail and they spend their entire lives hating white people, and then they have a white cellie, and then, you know, they get to talking, they spend a lot of time together, and eventually your opinions change. So I think that's a point of optimism with all this negativity surrounding like propaganda and how we can learn to be desensitized to even taking another person's life through exposure and practice and all that. On the same token, to that same extent, I think we can teach people to be cognizant of other racial dilemmas or conflicts or issues that come up in their lives. But we can do it. We can do it without like an inquisition, like you said, without putting people on trial and blasting them on record and slandering them on Facebook and social media or making them quit their jobs and screwing up their careers. Like if somebody's just ignorant, the solution is to just help them fix it. And if they're willing to help fix it, why do we need to crucify them? Like I really, really don't get the approach to finding this type of like demon to hang up and string on the like a pillory in front of an entire audience of the world.
The media is going along with it.
Not be angry.
Like I said in the last episode, like you get companies like Toronto Dominion Bank who coat all their banks in the pride flag, you know, making me like think that the pride flag, you know, and then you have the pride parades actually just go around and have explicit sexuality on display in thing. And I'm just like, no, does your bank actually stand for this? Well, our bank is for understanding. Our bank is for, you know, is for justice. No, your bank is for money. That's what a bank's for. If my bank isn't for money, then I don't trust them. Like I want them to be money hungry. I want them to be grubby. I want them to be a little gnomish because that's
their job, their function.
My money's in that bank. You better care about my money and only my money. Or I'm going to one that will, because that's your job. It's just like if I go to a mechanic and they don't have a bunch of pictures of cars and like hot rods up there, I'm going to be like, do you even like cars? Like if they have like pictures of, if it looks like a cute little tea shop, I'm going to be like, I want someone obsessed with cars to fix my car.
Word.
And so but the media itself, and I'm like the traditional media is what I'm saying, is going around saying, this is the way we should think, because they're listening to what sounds right, what will get them the least amount of reaction in the media. Well, say, oh, well, this person's doing so much for the Black people of America. Well, it sounds good, but what are they actually doing for the Black people of America? Well, they're trying to bring them socialism. My demonized socialism, not Kris's regulated free market.
My textual socialism. Yeah.
Yeah. So the bad type of socialism.
The one we all agree is bad.
Yeah, the one we all agree is bad. That's explicitly leading to communism. Well,
the communism we all agree is bad.
We do use the word in two different ways, as we proved in that one episode. Like, we both had a different definition of it, and both of those definitions were in fact correct.
Yeah.
Did I just agree with someone on the other side? My gosh.
Yeah, likewise.
I
think that's what's really important to note, though, and what we do a lot in this podcast is we show there's common ground even between diametrically opposed ideologies. Mm-hmm. So it's not the case that anyone is ever right or wrong, except in like a measurement, not an observation, but like a measurement. Then you can definitively say this has this mass, this has this energy, like this has this color. You can say that because you can measure the wavelength that it's reflecting. So we can measure certain things, but things like ideas of common ground or goodness or morality or virtue, guilt and shame, those things are all nebulous, like just intrinsically.
To me, it's not so much, and there was a interview with actually an engineer from around here that I thought was really interesting. And she said something like, well, there of course is no truth, there's just what works. So what we know, like, you can all have different opinions on something, like a bunch of those blind men who are all touching a different part of the elephant. And, well, they're wrong, obviously, because it's an elephant. It's not a tree. It's not a snake. It's not a boa constrictor. It's not a rock or a mountain. It's an elephant. But they're wrong because those explanations don't work. And so what works is, in society, and what we've seen to work in the past 200 years, after the Enlightenment, is if we treat everyone human and as equally human, people live happier lives. If we don't do inquisitions, people live happier lives. If we just assume people aren't evil unless shown otherwise, everyone lives happier lives. These are things that just straight up work. Now, the weird thing about it is that we don't actually know why some of this works. We just know that this works. We know why a bunch of it works. We know why freedom's better than whatever China's doing, because, North Korea. No one's happy there. The people that come out of there go, you're not going to believe it. Well, they don't say that because they're not Spanish. But so when we assume certain things, then people have better lives. When I don't just go, my neighbors are indigenous, and what would we be called? Not as well off as me. Well, they're not as educated. They're not as, they live a different life. But the kids come into the yard and I say, hey guys, this is private property. You can't just run onto my yard all the time. But would you like to see my garden? And they're like, yeah. So I show them around. This is basil. This is this. This is this. And they actually will come around and I'll give them a tour of my yard. This happened a couple times. I have boundaries, but I'm not unapproachable. And I'll talk to my neighbors, and I actually talk to them more than the other side because they're just outside more. And they're just living a different life. And if they're going to live a better life and I'm going to live a better life if we just accept the fact that we're both just living our lives in our respective houses. That's just how it works. And so
let's sort of talk about some solution then, like what does work. If we know that testing and this bias training isn't entirely ineffective, because it obviously does something, It helps people stop and take stock and actually, you know, mindful of their own prejudices, which is definitely good. But you could do that with hand puppets and sock drawings and stuff. So it's not like that's the way it has to be.
We're friends and get along. But on the other
what
side
does work?
But one, I don't know. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. Am I jumping ahead? I've
been trying to segue into one thing, but I think what does work, I think would be a good place to stop. But let me know, because I wanted to get into one thing.
We'll do that at the end.
Yeah. Is that there's page 9, section 2. Sorry. There's one thing that is bugging me about these tests and about measuring implicit bias and about the Inquisition, is that there's the idea of implicit cognition, where we have a process available through not available through introspection. So I can't look on the inside and change it. I can't go in and be like, that's the whole one of the things that I think we've glossed over poorly. Sorry. We can't change this by sitting. So we're talking about, well, if we talk about it to a Black person, we'll understand if we talk to an Indigenous person, we'll understand their perspective, and we can either help them or leave them alone and not just be a jerk to them and everyone like them because we understand that they're just people. This is, they assume that you're not able to do this. So not available through introspection, but affects our judgments and affects our actions. So these unavoidable and unchangeable judgments are affecting our actions and making us racist. So because I'm white, I have something about me being white and me being in the institutions and society that I have, flawed, but it's better than anything that really came before. See everything before the Enlightenment. Yeah, that 30 Years' War was a great idea. Let's just kill everyone in Munster because they're, Baptists. And so, that was a bit of a deep random pull. So the biggest
over my head, sorry.
There's a hardcore history episode on it. Essentially, the Baptists took over Munster, and the armies, some German armies, sieged it for like 3 years and killed everyone inside.
Oh, nice.
30 Years' War was terrible. And so one of the critiques of this is that if it's in our society, we have moral responsibilities to do certain things. It's morally reprehensible to kill. Why? Because if you choose to kill somebody, you get first-degree murder. If you accidentally kill someone, it's manslaughter. Knowingly killing somebody is worse than accidentally killing somebody. Why? Well, because you are showing a moral irresponsibility towards the lives of others. So the critique here is that, can one be held morally responsible if one is not in control? So if you are not able, through introspection, to control your judgments of others, are you still morally culpable for your racism? If I'm inherently racist because I'm white, does that make it immoral for me to be racist? This is a very strange critique, but
I don't think it holds water, but I'll let you finish.
No. So the problem is that if we're saying it's no, if racism, no, I'm of the opinion that racism, I'm arguing on their own terms, because I believe that racism isn't immoral. Like actual racism is immoral because you're interacting with people in a negative way, knowingly for bad reasons. You're acting immorally. You're lying. And
but the conflict with that is they believe their reasons are good. So It doesn't really jive, because you're not basing a judgment on a universal truth. You're basing it on a subjective truth. And that subjective truth, for the person being racist, they obviously think what they're doing is good.
Right. But it's not in line with what we know about humanity in reality.
No matter how strongly we believe it, though, another person believes strongly differently. So that's the problem with racism. You can't tell them that I'm right. What you have to do is show proof.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But you got to do it compassionately. You can't just bark it at them. You have to sit there side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and say, okay, let me hear you out. Why don't you like black people, and then have them describe it and then show them where they might be wrong so that they can reconsider it.
Right.
Being told what to think never fixes somebody's mind, though.
But if I'm like, if I pass someone up for promotion because they're black, that's immoral. That's you're not going, it's
to you and I, it's immoral.
But if I don't do that, and if I hire a black person because of their merit, and then someone comes in and tells me, oh, you failed the implicit bias test, you're inherently racist. Is that immorality? Because if I can't control, even though I'm doing and not giving, if I'm not caring about what it is, if the implicit bias test shows I'm racist, am I actually, like, does that actually matter on a moral level? Because they're claiming, according to their own rules, that I can't change this, and it's something inherent to who I am. So is it immoral for a bird to
fly?
Well, a bird to fly, or a bird to attack, or a cat to attack a bird. It's inherent to what it is. They see a bird and they just start salivating. They'd be like, I want to go chase that thing. And so that's inherent to what they are. And so that's natural.
And that's a good analogy, because you can teach a cat not to chase birds.
Oh, they'll want to.
Yeah, they'll want to, but you can teach them not to. And that's sort of what we're trying to do with racism. We're not, or what they should be trying to do. Like, what their actual aim should be is to abate racism so that it stops causing harm.
Right.
If their aim is to control people's minds, that's an immoral aim for the test itself.
Right. And so
it should just point out where they need to look. That's all.
Well, the claim is that if I hire a black person, I did it because I'm trying to look not racist. And because no one can see into each other's minds, you can just ascribe motives to people, like
which Nazis. Is constant, like the TD reference you made.
Yeah. And so, like, if I hire a Aboriginal person, then I did it because I'm trying not to look racist. I'm complicit in the system. I'm doing it for nefarious purposes. I'm immoral. So everything I do is of a racist nature. It has something to do with racist. And this is, so whether or not my critique is valid, what's happening is, on the basis of this entire thing, and now I guess after this we can get into what we can do, is the basis of the entire thing isn't looking for whether or not there is racism. It's people going into companies and institutions and schools and classes and all the way everywhere, looking for the racism that they assume is already there. They're not, is there racism? Where is the racism? And this is dangerous, because this is an inquisition. It's not, is the devil in this town? Where's the devil in this town? Someone's going to pay. Someone's going to die when the Inquisition comes into town. And this is why I'm against this. So.
Yeah, I really don't think it should ever be used to assess, like, the extent or degree of somebody's racism. It should just be a way of identifying problematic areas, not the opposite, and showing how great somebody else is. Like, it doesn't measure on the upscale. The only part of the test measures on the downscale. Just like IQ. It only matters if you're below 90 or below 80 or below 70 for a medical diagnosis. Everything to the upside is irrelevant. It's just proof that you're not mentally disabled.
Right. And it's really a tool to help understand what bias is. It was created as a tool to better understand human psychology, which is a lot different from helping understand the motives and biases of individuals. And it's actually a good stepping stone on understanding how human bias works, because that's the job of psychologists. How does human bias work? So we make, just like IQ tests, how does intelligence work? So we make an IQ test to measure it in a different way, to see how intelligence maybe might function differently on a different test. And so we have a bunch of different types of tests to see how the animal of intelligence or the animal of bias might work under different circumstances. Because the better we understand things like bias from a evolutionary, from a genetic, from a sociological perspective, the better we can understand the way we are as people. That has nothing to do with me as an individual. It has nothing to do with how my coworker might think of me. the best way to interact with your coworker of a different race or a different thing is just to talk to them. You don't need a test to get to know somebody. You can just talk to people. And if you're afraid of it, tough, suck it up.
Yeah, and on the flip side, the people that get talked to, like there's always the white person in the crowd meeting a black person for the first time and they want to touch their hair. Like, it's just an impulse that every white person has ever had when they see something different, right?
Yeah, or you get like
on the flip side,
with anyone different, like you get that picture of that Asian guy who went to Africa and all those like black kids are just being like, they're doing the
exactly, and that's what I mean. On the flip side, it's the same for the cameraman or journalist from Time Magazine or National Geographic walking through tribes in Uganda or something, where they've never seen white people before, some of those kids. Yeah. And they want to touch them and look at them and examine them because that's human nature.
Could you imagine if you've never seen silk or polyester and some guy's just casually wearing an artificial fiber shirt and it's just like, what even is this?
Yeah. The thing is, that's human curiosity. That's intrinsic to our nature. That's the stuff that we can't control or change or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But what I think we can do is encourage the black person who gets the white guy come up to him and say, let me touch your hair. Encourage them and help train them to not be offended by it and to compassionately respond, hey, that's really inappropriate. So that the guy doesn't keep doing it for the rest of his life. You know what I mean? Like,
the first you learn
racism out of people.
That's how we learn. Like we learn all the time like that. You go to a restaurant and you learn how the rules of that particular restaurant work. Oh, how do I do this? Oh, the forks are all weird. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And then the waiter teaches you the rules of the restaurant and everything's different. But
when you fumble together, when you can laugh about it, it's not racism anymore. It's just humans being curious and different. Mm-hmm. Like, if we're going to celebrate diversity, we have to celebrate the fact that people are going to have different ideas. And for an idea to exist, somebody must hold it. So there's always going to be insane people who believe in astrology or believe in the KKK's modes of modus operandi. There's always going to be kooks. There's always going to be these people. But we just need to make it common enough sense and generally aware to everyone else to not tolerate it. But that doesn't mean you flog them publicly and like hurt them intentionally as people for having bad ideas. Chances are, if they have a bad idea, somebody else taught it to them and they were raised a certain way and they suffered a trauma that made them susceptible to ignorance and, hatred and things like that. Chances are that person is enduring something that makes them or enables them to believe in something that's insane. So approaching them as a patient as opposed to a combatant is way more helpful in changing the broad spectrum of the entire case of all, not just bias, but like racism, prejudice, discrimination, all of that.
Yeah, and like you get like if we pillory people for that, it's a lot of you get Foucault talking about like the first page of Discipline and Punish is a public flogging. That doesn't help. What helps is, and he goes into like his old biopolitics thing, which is kooky. But the whole thing is like we've moved past this and changed it into something different. Now we punish the body in a different way. But the thing is that we don't need to punish the body for infractions. We now have things called psychologists who can talk to these people. Someone goes around going like, oh, the white race needs to be blah, blah, blah. It's like, you shouldn't be thinking it's like, that's a racist. You should be thinking like, that guy needs some help.
Yeah, let's teach this out of him.
Yeah, let's give him reasons. Like I had some pretty darn bad ideas in the day. Not just the ones I covered in my left episode. I was dumb. I had weird ideas.
Everybody starts off dumb.
And like I got reasons for changing my mind. And the best thing to do to change someone out is to, reason the way out of it. If you have a good reason for something, then it'll be good. But if you have a complex construct, now the people who are administering these tests actually believe the stuff. They have reasons for it, but it's a messy construct, and it's hard. And you can explain anything away by saying, well, that's just your subjective opinion, or that's just your truth. I'm living mine. It's like, that's dangerous because it allows for anything to be true.
But how arrogant would you have to be to walk into a room and say, I'm a professional at racial sensitivity training? Like, just to be the person administering this test and expecting people to assume that you're the expert on, some people do philosophy, some do math and calculus, and some people are inventing. Like, no, my job is I can tell white from black. It's just so painfully obtuse. I don't know why people go along with this, especially in the workplace where they're teaching sensitivity training. There is a place for sensitivity training. I'm not saying it's not a thing. But if that's your only job, that's like saying my only job is to browse the internet. Like, what do you do for a living? If you just say everybody has a bias, let's try and help people acknowledge it. Well, like, that's what kindergarten teachers do since I was a kid. That we've been doing this for generations. Just as side jobs. Like, my priest would do it if I made a racist joke in church, and my teachers would correct me. If I played hockey, the coach would correct me. Like, there's constantly adults in society teaching kids not to be like this because we all do it.
Yeah.
Like, that works. Why do you need to hire an expert psychologist with a test to administer to see how racist somebody is?
Well, and you're bringing up a really good point, is that we already had this figured out.
Yeah, it just takes time.
We had it figured out.
It's
like,
slow.
Martin Luther King was the guy who put the nail in the coffin. Like, there was still systemic racism. Like, duh. Like, America was racist. I can't say that Canada and America are racist nowadays, but this group is definitely making it more racist. They were bringing it back. Like, 2010, 2011, we were doing great. Like, no one cared. Everyone was stopping caring. There were a few, less and less people were caring. The racists were dying off. But we're bringing it back because it's cool.
But we have laws. We should just enforce those. If somebody's harassing somebody, that's illegal. Like, it doesn't need to be labeled a hate crime. You don't need to punish it worse than everything else. You don't need to have them do
human rights laws. Why do we need hate crime laws? Hate crime laws. That's another episode that I would rant about.
Spray painting something, I agree, is a hate crime because you're advertising it and you're broadcasting it, right? That's different from beating some individual up for being of a certain affiliation or whatever.
This is the other thing, is that I got like 2 points here. One of them is we're teaching people to be like this again, and I'll get into that. But the thing about it is, you get spray painting something on the wall is a great example, because this is a lot of what's happening in our society. Well, it sounds high-minded, but whatever. I see it a lot. You spray paint a, racial slur or of some sort on a wall. Now, what law is being broken? You're defacing a wall. Well, okay. And what needs to be done is a slap on the wrist, because you're being an asshole. And it's
a community service. Have them go wash a whole bunch of walls.
Like, they pay a fine, but then they want to say, well, that's not good enough because I want them pilloried by the Inquisition. And that's not what our law code does. Everyone wants our law code to be something it's not. He should be fined for defacing public property or community service. That's what he put away for. No, I want to put away for
community service.
I want to put away for immorality. I hate graffiti people. Honestly, it's one of those things that just bugs me. I
love the people. I hate crimes though. They really bug me. But yeah, they should clean the wall and pay for the paint to clean the wall.
People see it as an injustice. Yes, he wrote something you didn't like, and he's getting punished. Well, he's not getting punished for the thing I want. So we need to make a law that when you write something on the wall, you get a harsher fine because you're insulting people. And Britain's the worst offender for this right now, because they've got those hate speech laws where you get that guy who taught his dog to Heil Hitler. And he got like,
I'm sorry, that's funny though. Like, yeah, it's funny. As a Jew, like, that's still funny.
It's funny, and he got the cops coming. Well, he didn't commit a crime. Well, then why are you taking me away? Well, there's still things. So you can't say things in Britain. You can't say things online. There's thought police over there. There's literally thought police.
And that's a slippery slope.
That is like, my wife doesn't like slippery slope comments, but this is one of them. And I think the ability to talk to people reasonably is the only thing that's going to get rid of racism. And if we limit the way people talk, it's going to enforce
or make them scared to have an idea.
Yeah. It's like, well, I want to talk. You can't have a conversation with a black person, honestly, if you are limited in your speech.
Or if you get accused of hatred for it, like,
what happens if you make a mistake? What happens if you don't know? You're just like, oh, this is the first black person I've ever met. I want to talk to them. I want to get to know them. I want to know.
And that's the thing that extends, because as you become their manager, then there's a power control dynamic, right? And then you got to worry about workplace environment, and you got to worry about like all these other liabilities come into play just because of somebody's skin color. And you're like, wait, I thought we were supposed to not. We were trying to minimize the effect of people. Of events occurring or actions taking place because of skin color.
Yeah.
Our goal is to minimize that, and the outcome is people worry about it as a liability or a token,
Well, the antidote is not tokenism, but it's
no quotas and no liabilities, no punishments. It should just be conversation, like you said.
If you have a conversation and you screw up by talking to, an Indigenous person, and oh man, I didn't know you guys didn't like that. You should be able to say that. You shouldn't have to be like, I have committed an offense because of my whiteness, blah, blah, blah. No, it should just be like, oh, sorry, man, I didn't know. But, now I know. Tell me about that. That's how relationships get made. Free speech allows us to make relationships on equal terms.
And that leads to peace.
Yes.
Always.
And we're not teaching that in the university. And this is where this is coming from. But we have people who aren't allowed to use non-feminist sources, in classes. We have people that are being forced to hear stuff. They have struggle sessions straight out of Mao's Red Book, and that what they were doing in the Cultural Revolution in China, which killed tens of millions of people. No exaggeration. What struggle session essentially is, you get a bunch of people together and you find someone's unconscious bias. Then it was towards, anti-revolutionaryism. Now it's towards, sexism or this. You find someone's sin. Now, everyone has sin. Everyone has some indiscretion. Like you said, that original sin, we can find it. You just have to, you can make one up. And it doesn't even have to be one someone has. Cardinal Richelieu famously said, find me an innocent person and I'll find something to hang him with, or find someone who's never lied. Or
that should be the quote for the episode.
Yeah, I got to find that one.
Okay.
So, write that down.
Yeah, I'll write it down. So I got it.
What we're being told is we are doing these sessions and we're doing these things where people are being told, this is how you should think. This is how you need to think. And, people in these classes are like, well, I'm white. And it's like, well, you're inherently racist. Or they'll challenge them, and then they'll stay in the mott like all white people are racist. And they'll be like, well,
can I touch your hair? Racist.
Well, you get someone saying like, well, asking one of these consultants who are paid exorbitant amounts of money, what, I'm white. I don't like, I have lots of black friends and stuff. Am I a racist? And they'll go from the mott, all white people are racist, to the Bailey. Well, it's a little more complicated and nuanced than that. So they're using a lot of these tools in order to make people guilty, because guilt is what they thrive on. But they're not allowed to speak outside of this. If you talk about this, you're a Republican. I was like, wait, what? I'm not even American. And you, or you're a white supremacist, or you're white this. Like, I've never advocated for supremacy of the white race ever. Like, even in my stupid days. And I don't know. I am what I am, and I have to be that. But when you have to go through these like indoctrination sessions and call out, like find an apostate and they call them out, say, okay, you have this wrong with you. And then you have to admit it. They force them to admit something that they're really not guilty of, even though it's somewhat true, that they see difference between people in society. Well, yes, I see black people as having different skin color. Look, there's black and there's white. It's the difference between a hockey puck and the ice. It's like, of course, everyone's going to notice that. So they're guilty of it. And so they force them to, in their guilt, ask for forgiveness from the group or something. And they have now converted that apostate. They know the error of their ways. And a converted person is person that's gone through that trauma, come out the other side, and is now a believer because, they have been given power. Now, if you don't submit in the Cultural Revolution, they would just shoot you. Luckily, we can't do that here. But in classes, in university classes, and this was happening towards the end of when I started university, this wasn't happening as much. When I was ending university, this was happening. It's really what drove me away from it, was the entire class was trying to find a consensus. And then I would argue against it because that's not really what the reading said. Or this.
It's also the purpose of school, though. It's not to just all find out what we agree on.
To come to a synthesis, to come to a better understanding. Maybe we'll all put our heads together because we're all, none of us are stupid as all of us. But
the challenge of thought, that's the purpose of university.
Even if we don't come up with something, the effect of it was we understand the issue better. Even if it's something like, public parks and, inner city Edmonton or something, there's still issues with it. Well, the zoning laws are really weird in this thing. It's like, well, I didn't know that. Now we can tell me more about that. Well, I know that, the transit system here is blah, blah, boring stuff. It's not always about race. And so when you're not allowed to use certain sources, when you're not allowed to use certain, if you read John Stuart Mill, well, you're a racist. Well, John Stuart Mill was not a racist.
Well, Heidegger was actually part of the Nazi Party. He was a prominent figure there and lent them money.
Right. Yeah, and
So it's common that people have bad ideas even if they're smart. Like nobody's immune to it. Nobody.
We're graduating people, we're indoctrinating people instead of educating them, and that's a lot of where this is coming from. And I'm like, it's honestly worrying me. And when you have this, a lot of what's coming out of it is like, well, we got to get rid of free speech. Why? Well, because people could advocate whatever they want. They could advocate hate speech. It's like, well, the other thing they could do with hate speech is have uncomfortable conversations with people of other races. Wouldn't that be terrible?
Yeah, like the real punishment should be the person for the rest of their lives is on record having said something they'll later regret. Like eventually these people will probably learn that they were wrong their whole life.
Well,
they'll be embarrassed as hell, and you won't need to throw any guilt at them, like any extra. Mm-hmm. They'll get enough guilt on their own from what they've already said.
Well, ruling from fear doesn't work, but that's exactly what we're doing here. I have my name up here. My name. Well, not my full name. It's too long. And you have your name up here. We're putting we're saying what we're saying. And we know that our names and our reputations are going behind what we're saying. So we have to be darn sure. I don't know why I censored myself there, of what we're saying, because I could, face consequences for what I'm saying. Well, but I'm not going to live in fear of these people. I refuse to live in fear.
And we may even regret saying something, right?
Yes.
Like there's always that risk.
Well, we both have come back and said, yeah, I was wrong in that episode a couple times. And it's no big thing. But at the same time, that forces us to try harder. But at the same time, it gives us a lot more credit. For someone who wears a mask, goes to their black bloc things, just look it up on Wikipedia. People that they dress in black and they wear their masks and they're anonymous. If you go to a protest anonymously, well, unless you're in China, then, you have to put up, you have to say this. And it gives us more credit because I'm putting what I'm saying and I'm putting my reputation on the line for what I'm saying. And that is something big. I'm doing that as an individual. You can trust me more because I'm not going to risk slipping up because I want to get a job in the future. Well, a different job. And, if my clients see this and they don't agree with it, I could lose a client. So I'm putting this out there because I believe it to be closest to the truth. And I've so far advocated against racism. I've advocated for diversity, but I've also advocated against social justice and against inquisitional behavior and against institutional racism. I don't think institutional racism is a good way of looking at the thing. So that could get me in a lot of trouble. Well, you don't believe that, these people are victims? I think we're all victims. Like, it's
a political party of racists, specifically where they only subscribe to each other's racism, that's an organization of institutional racism.
Like Nazi Party had institutional racism.
Yes, that's an institutionally racist system, yes. But as soon as you start censoring cool stuff.
Yeah, like the Southern
discourse.
Like the Confederate States of America. Definitely institutionally racist. Sorry. Sorry.
When you start getting people fired from their careers that they've spent a lifetime building, and you drag their souls through the mud for the merit of their character as people, individual people, not just like an employee who misspoke or something like that, or a politician, but their entire life's work should not be reduced to a human error, no matter how egregious it is. And like, even if we say something really bad that we later regret, right? I'll be able to admit that I was a human who made mistakes while trying to figure things out on camera. And I'm okay with that because I don't claim to be perfect. I think my ideas are sound enough that other people should be able to help enlighten me. If I tell them my ideas, they'll be able to respond to something and I'll gain more benefit out of it than I lose.
Yeah.
But to create that public shame as a form of punishment against people we disagree with today assumes that we today will never be enlightened tomorrow and think that today we said something that we later regret. That's the thing about youth. At the moment, you don't feel young. It's later on down the road when you're wiser that you realize that you were a dumb little kid.
Well, that's why we give children a free pass to some extent, because they're going to do stupid stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And all humans will. They'll just do less of it over time.
You're not responsible
hopefully
for your actions. Why? Because you're 10 and like you're going to have some stupid actions.
But you still sit the kid down and say, this is wrong. Don't keep doing it. You know what I mean? And that's how we should be treating adults, not like patronizing them. But we should be like, yo, dude, take him off to the side after saying something publicly loud that was offensive. Take him quietly off to the side and say, like, listen, that was offensive. It hurts my feeling. We can talk about it later. I just want to let you know. And I didn't want to like call you out in public for it. Because that type of character assault ruins people's careers and their life's work. And it like tarnishes every other thing that they've done based on an accusation that's not sound for intent. There's no context behind it.
Sometimes for me, it's the accusation is something so benign, like you have a house and therefore you're benefiting from racism. It's like, what? God forbid I enjoy, property. It's like, oh, you got married and therefore you're oppressing a woman. It's like, I don't think so. You need to, like, honestly, I've heard people argue that to me, and every time someone says it, I'm absolutely offended by that accusation, because it's not often like we're like, a lot of what we're talking about is like, you make a social faux pas, you do something accidentally racist, which is completely possible,
entirely possible in my case.
Yeah, you kind of push that bound.
I push the bar.
Yeah, but a lot of times, a lot of these people, because it's an institutional issue. So if you have a house, if you're complicit in capitalism, if you're part of the institution of marriage, which is, an oppressive thing, it's like, okay, anybody who says that has never been married to someone who they absolutely love, and realizes that there's nothing oppressive about it. Or like having a house on a nice street, where everyone on the street, like if everyone on the street is taking care of their house and, taking care of their property, being pleasant, living with pleasant people, it doesn't matter what race they are. That's a good place to be. And to accuse someone of immorality just because they've succeeded in having something beautiful in their life is evil. And it's evil from sour grapes. You don't have something. You are unfortunate in your life or holding yourself back or something, and you are going to take it out on the people who are succeeding, or are working on their stuff, or are doing this. You see this in every culture too. The indigenous call their people who want to go to university like, oh, you're being an apple, you're red on the outside and you're white on the inside. It's like, oh, look at you, and they mock them for trying to better themselves, God forbid. And that's like, I've met people who are just like, yeah, I went to school and my family disowned me. It's like, but I've got a job now, so I don't care. I think I met that guy at Occupy, and I learned that was a thing. And I was like, that's horrifying. But every culture does this. You have people with sour grapes want to bring people down with them. And that's evil. That's just like, there is evil in the world. And that's one of the things that is evil. Arbitrary imposition of justice on the innocent. Like,
But again, I think we should show compassion to the roots of it, right? So the person who's trying to bring down their best friend for going to school is probably dealing with an insecurity and self-esteem problem that we're not fixing or helping.
Just like the racist, that person needs our compassion. Yeah, exactly. They need our help. And and the problem isn't that. The problem isn't when, like, we need to get that person maybe some help. What do you need? Like, social worker? Like, do you need some guidance? Blah, 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 blah. But when they come up with stuff, now I've been in dark places before, and you come up with some like, oh, I just want people to, like, I just want to get back at people. And I understand that. But when you have to fan the good flames and smother the bad ones. And when you enable things like, oh, well, you're only sad because of the fact that you are Indigenous and, you know, being oppressed, something. It's like, well, what is that individual person doing to better themselves? Well, they're raging against the machine. That's not useful. It feels good. That's why we have a band called Rage Against the Machine. And so...
and they just scream a lot.
Yeah. And so they... and it's fun to rage against the machine to some extent. When some random injustice happens to you, which it will, and it will happen like every 3 weeks because, you know, the weather can change and a tree could fall on your garage. Now you have to pay money to fix a garage. That's injustice. It's not just, but you have to deal with it. So you rage against
stats.
Yeah. You yell at God or the wind or the weather or something, and then you get over it. And then you fix your garage. And that's what we need to help these people do, is fix themselves, become the better self of themselves that doesn't just look for a scapegoat and sour grapes. And there's a lot of people, and we're allowing this en masse out of some need to balance the books on some weird equation of race that doesn't have any basis in reality. Whereas normal people will allow them, but we have a lot of university students that are saying, no, you need to do this. Keep yelling because your individual feeling is what's important, not getting better as a human being. And we're letting evil seep in to some extent. And it's hurting a lot of other people when all we need to do is talk, help, be compassionate, lift people up instead of push people down. And I think that's what I have to say on that.
I think the best approach to me would be to find the sources of continued perpetuating instances. Like, for example, just this will be in a glossy hypothetical world, but like, let's say a native girl goes home, she's living with her roommate's her best friend. She says, I'm going to sign up for school and I'm going to get a loan and I'm going to put myself in debt, and it's going to be, you know, part-time work in the evenings while I'm studying. Life's going to be hard and I'm going to do it though, because that's what I want from life. If that best friend then turned around and said, oh, you're trying to be white, or you're changing who you are, or anything like that, that's the person we should be trying to help. Mm-hmm. I mean, we should also help the girl go to school and everything. But the one who's perpetuating these types of bad ideas to sit and rest on the easy side of racism and victimhood, those are the people that we need to show and empower. Like, look, even you can do this if you choose to. And if you choose not to, that's okay. You can be whoever you want because you're worth it. Like, if we told those people that they were individuals and humans that we support and love equally among all people, I think less people would hear that type of echo that reinforces their biases and prejudices. I think that's the best way to nip it in the bud, so to speak, is not to just all at once up front be like, here's a test, here's a solution, here's your training. It should be a gradual, lifelong thing where they just stop hearing negative things about their race. That to me is how you fix racism. It's never going to be done with an instance or a police or like designation of an exaggeration in law. Like a hate crime makes one assault twice as bad just because it's a hate crime. Yeah. Like, I call it like the devil coefficient. You're basically just putting a number in front of X to say how much times worse it is than something that otherwise
it's double
wouldn't.
jeopardy. That's in Canada and America's constitution. It's like English common law, one of those things. You can't be tried twice for the same crime.
Yeah.
Like,
but you can be punished twice for the same crime, but you can't be tried twice.
I don't. Well,
I'm joking. That's what they're doing with a hate crime, is they're doubling the punishment for the same crime.
Yeah, and what it does is it ends up to restrictions on what we can do and say.
And it makes people resentful. People who see that and who say, like, hey, my friend only got 2 years in jail for an assault, and this other guy my brother got 5. I'm going to be like, you guys are racist and everyone's against me and I'm angry now and I'm going to fight the system. Like, they perpetuate the mentality by singling it out and exaggerating it with a coefficient, the devil coefficient, saying like it's this much worse just because it's a hate crime or it's intent or whatever. And that does make sense in cases like murder. But the reason it makes sense in the case of murder is anybody can accidentally kill somebody else by being dumb. Like when you and I were fooling around, any one of us could have slipped off a building and died, and the other would have been. We could have ran into another car when we were driving around like idiots and slammed into a family that had no reason, or it would have been. And I'm not justifying our actions either. We would have been punished. It would have been unjustifiable. Yeah. But it's not the same as planning it out and saving up money and putting a stash in a numbered company offshore to pay off your assassin. Like, that's totally different. Going that far out of your way to try and get around the law and murder somebody is obviously worse than kids having fun and just being stupid and ignorant. Mm-hmm. So, but to put that in front of a hate crime, if the person believes in the hate crime stuff, why would they think any different? There's nothing for them to reconsider. They don't have the opportunity to stop and think about how terrible their actions are beyond the actual assault, because they don't see the racism as a problem. So calling something a hate crime and punishing them twice for it doesn't make them less racist. It's going to make them more angry that somebody retaliated against them for having ideas and because of the color of their skin. That's going to make them more racist. You're going to radicalize more people with hate crime punishments. Right. And then you're going to get the only reason I agree with it is because of you're going to create that other and that enemy that you want. And then you're going to have this nice, neat, fascists fight the communists duality, which has no basis in reality, or whatever ist that you want. And it ends up being too simple with no nuance and has no bearing on reality. And when something, and it doesn't address the problem of human nature. Like, it doesn't do one thing to actually prevent the problem from happening again. And to me, a law should be preventative more than enforced. I would much rather see murders not happen because of our law than to see a bunch of people tried for murder. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It should discourage people from doing things that are adverse that you don't need to do. Like, nothing in the law that's against the law prevents you from eating, getting companionship or acquiring property and getting the fruits of your labor. The law is meant to protect those things. Or as even something as rudimentary as seeking forgiveness. And not forgiveness as in bowing before a group of racial entity and asking, kowtowing. That's not forgiveness. That's subordination. That's not what we want here. We are all citizens of our nations here in Canada, America, France, all the democracies of the world. We are citizens, which is very, very important. That's a word you should hold very dear, because it means we're all equal to one another in society under the law and as people, as human of different abilities. But that's the diversity that freedom allows us to leverage to do all the wonderful things we can do in society. And when we create differences between people, which is why when we were talking about our citizen service guaranteed citizenship, your major critique was, well, you're creating another class of people. And that's why in society, when there's an opportunity for someone to be like, oh, that would be neat, but you're creating another class of people. So no, because the sacred status of all that we all have, and I use sacred consciously, is that we are all equally human in a society together. There's no government above us. The government serves us. I'm forgetting that. And we have to understand that when you make citizens subject to other citizens, when you subordinate them to others, that's
not healthy in a democracy. And you end up with what Kris is describing, people who are just able to go around doing, laying out judgments, making injustice. Citizens can bring each other up, which is kind of what we're saying. We can see the error, the deficiencies in other citizens and lend a helping hand. The government doesn't need to step in because we have a bunch of citizens available to be like, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And people do this all day. That's why we have soup kitchens. That's why we have help in resource centers. That's why we have
crisis lines and stuff like that.
Addictions counselings, because citizens want to help citizens. Equals. They see these people who are in the mud, who are having the worst life they could have, and they see them as an equal enough to help them and bring them up. And that's important.
And that should be what we're striving for in a society, right? Like if I want to raise kids, I can't always be there for my kid, and my kid might not wind up having any friends. Like if my kid is completely alone and has no way to take care of themselves and I'm out of the picture or something, like we should want to live in a society that if somebody falls off, they get picked up. And it shouldn't be the first line of defense, like the government services or social services or welfare or anything like that. But it should definitely be the last line. Like there's a bare minimum that we should offer people, like mental health, for instance. If somebody doesn't have a family to commit them and take them to the hospital, somebody should still take them. Yeah,
family, friends, and the government's there as a net. Well, we've said this before. It's a safety net. The last.
But we should want that to be there, even if it's never used. It should be there. And
I think, I don't know. I think if we have commissars or Einsatzgruppen or Antifa or KKK or Inquisition going around, it's hurting us on a massive level, and I'm worried about it. This is why I'm talking about it. This is why I'm ranting about it, because I'm worried. And I think that's where I'm probably going to leave it.
I think I just wanted to reiterate one point I made earlier too, is about the authority figure. As soon as you set up or establish some type of constraint or controls over how people need to govern themselves in a civilized society, as soon as you put somebody in charge of that group or operation, like the FDA or the FTC or the CFTC or especially the market regulators like Finch and Standard & Poor and Moody's, like they're all carried by or susceptible to corruption by people who are running them. So you have to be really careful about the power you instill in an authority that gets to determine what is and isn't racist to which and which degree, because you're also giving a human being that same control over other people's life and death, specifically their career and stuff, not to make it too sensational and talk about death. But when it comes to healthcare, whether you give somebody healthcare or you write them off as some racist nut, like giving them mental health might save their life. So we shouldn't be identifying this to demonize people or criminalize people. We should be only looking to identify racism to find areas in where people are uneducated and need education, but not in the sense that like, I'm going to train you in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
In that the calm, compassionate sense is, how could you possibly think that? Let me help you.
Well, like everything in our society, this should happen on the individual level, not in the institutional level. If we put our effort, like so many times in history, things have done, like you just said, into a big man, into a leader, oh glorious Führer or first citizen, then, well, you're not going to be able, because individuals need that nuance. You need to approach individuals on that individual level. You can only help people as an individual. You can't help people as a group. It just doesn't work. What you end up with is dogma.
And you also can't assign individuals to an entire group of racists just for saying one thing ignorant or for doing one thing ignorantly, or you know what I mean? If you're not making an environment conducive to open discussion, and then you expect people to just have some kind of enlightened knowledge of how to interact with other races like appropriately, that's ridiculous. we should expect that people need to learn how to be socialized because that's what we do for kids. So if a kid grows up and isn't perfectly socialized, as all humans are imperfect, this should happen just statistically. There should be some kind of mechanism for us to smooth and iron those deficits out of our system. The best way you can do that is just with a discourse that doesn't discourage people from discourse. So as soon as you start shaming or guilting people who aren't in the know, but who carry an identity or a set of beliefs that are, deviant to what we'd suggest is moral in these days. But just because they carry those doesn't mean they will forever carry them. And it also doesn't mean they're a criminal for having dumb ideas. Every human being has dumb ideas. Some are dumber than others, obviously, but everybody can be educated out of dumb ideas too, which is the other side plot. If we can train people to kill and suppress their revulsion to the idea of taking life of another person, then we can train that out of people who have a hatred or anger, probably premised in just insecurity for themselves. They don't believe they can do it, so they want to blame the entire race or species or whatever on external factors that they could, if empowered, control within themselves. So I think most racist people, it's an identity issue, an uneducation issue, and it's perpetuated because we're not open to discussing it, primarily, and secondly because we're trying to punish people for it, which is like punishing a drug addict. Like, it's a medical problem. You can't punish the heroin out of somebody.
Yeah, it's like, well, this is why we have, that's why we have needle centers.
But in the States, they don't. They punish people for it, and they'll still lock up drug addicts for having drugs, for possession.
Yeah.
But I mean, they don't really enforce that in Canada because we're not dumb. Whereas in the States, there's like an actual economy surrounded by like how many people you can lock up. So you pay off the police department, so the police department rounds up more people. Politicians are happy because it looks like they're tough on crime, even though all of the science says that being tough on crime doesn't prevent crime. We just ignore it. But that's probably a topic for another day, though. I think I've said my 2 cents.
Yeah, American prison system. I mean, need to get an expert in on that, but I think that's
John Oliver's done it so many times, I wouldn't even bother.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to let it go.
Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to Frivolous Gravitas with myself, Christopher Driver. As always, my faithful compatriot, Jordan Roy.
I try. So,
you want to give us a taste of what we're looking forward to next week?
Next week, we're going to be talking about Remembrance Day.
And we got a special coming up. Yep.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to be doing a special for Remembrance Day. So,
and we're nearing the end of season 1. So keep tuning in to see some new updates to the, what do you call it? The flair, I guess. The Frivolous Gravitas flair.
The aesthetic.
We're making things prettier, but only slightly because we have seasons to go.
You're already pretty enough for both of us, so
incremental improvement. That's the that's the, what do you call that?
That's a good axiom.
Motivational, an axiom for the day. That's what I was trying to get at. See, right. Faithful.
All right, I'll see you guys around.
Bye.
Bye.